which, hey everybody, Dustin Siggins with Proven Media Solutions. How you doing today? Welcome to another episode of Cracking the Comms Code. We have Alan, Lindsay, and Jasper today on Cracking the Comms Code. And what we're going to talk about is kind of what's been dominating the communications conversation the last 3 or 4 years is how do we survive and thrive in the era of AI slop? And so I'm going to throw it to Jasper, Lindsay, and Alan. They're each going to do brief intros about themselves and kind of where they're coming from on the topic. And then I want to talk about how I was really afraid for about 2.5 years that my company and my job was going to be eliminated, but how I got over that. And then we're going to talk about how each person here brings a different perspective to how we can actually survive and thrive. So let's go to Jasper first, then Lindsay, and then Alan.
Hi, I'm Jasper Hamill. I'm Director of Content at Proven Media Solutions and a journalist of very long standing, decades rather than years, unfortunately. A tech journalist primarily. So my interest in AI is both journalistically, I've been writing about AI for a long time now, at least 10 years. And professionally, I'm interested in using it to produce content at scale whilst combining some of the human storytelling elements that I've picked up after writing for the British tabloids to an audience of tens of millions.
My name is Lindsay. I lead go-to-market and communications at a boutique SEO and AEO, GEO, whatever acronym you like, agency. My background is 15 years in PR and communications, mostly in the B2B SaaS tech space. Worked at FreshBooks for over 10 years, accounting software. Also worked at MaintainX, which is an industrial AI software. I jumped into the agency world last October, was recruited by a good friend to help with communications strategy and some advisory work at the SEO agency. We're building a series of stealth tools and helping clients figure out this new world of AI search. So I've been immersed with some really smart SEOs for about 8 months, definitely the black sheep on the team, but good to be here.
And I'm Alan Shoebridge. I'm happy to join you all. I work at Providence, leading the national communication team. And Providence is a West Coast-based healthcare system. We have 51 hospitals, 120,000 caregivers. We're a pretty large organization, have a large communication team. And I really didn't know anything about AI or very little up until about 4 years ago when sort of ChatGPT exploded on the scene and we all started kind of playing around with it. And I'm getting texts from people saying, is this the end of our career? And, a lot of panic. But I think over the last couple of years, I've really figured out how this helps us in our profession and some opportunities that we can lean into. So I'm excited to talk about it today with all you.
We're having some technical issues, folks. So anyone watching, please comment to make sure you can actually see us and hear us because for some reason the back end froze. So again, let us know if you can't hear or see us. More importantly, well, not more important, because if you can't see us, that's a problem. But please bring any kinds of questions you have into the comments. And we know this is a big topic, and we want to answer them live to make sure this conversation is as valuable as possible for everyone watching. I linked a piece yesterday when I put the event page up that I wrote on the topic of why I'm embracing the era of AI slop. After ChatGPT came out in fall of 2022, we had just started with an AI client a month earlier. I didn't even know what generative AI was until we put the proposal together. And I thought, oh, this is going to be a client, whatever. And then ChatGPT came out and suddenly nobody cared about our client's $9 million in investor funding because ChatGPT was around. And I really thought we're doomed. We do 80% of our work any given month is op-eds and pitching, interviews based on those op-eds, and we're doomed. AI can write op-eds for us. And then I realized most of the stuff that was out there was garbage. It really was slop. And I thought, oh, we're going to thrive because we bring in third-party authors. We bring in creative thinking. We do interviews with our authors, whether they're third-party or whether they work for the client, to make sure that we're getting to that underlying storytelling. And so when Alan posted about maybe 2-3 months ago about how we need to be counselors instead of content, focus on that and the sort of his role as the strategist, the CCO. Lindsay talked about the need for understanding the tools of AI to accelerate the value of PR. And Jasper has always talked about how AI is super valuable but the human brain, understanding pain and understanding narrative and how things click and connect really creates a three-part legs of a stool for understanding how to make the sale that we are still valuable today. And so I want to start with Jasper and content. I want to go to Alan for counsel, and then to Lindsay, how we take content and counsel and spread it out beyond just the media placement or the interview that we secure. So Jasper, if you can dive into that, I think you talked about Darwinian things earlier in our prep call.
I too remember the moment that ChatGPT launched. This has become a bit of a shorthand across the tech sector. I wrote an article not so long about when will quantum computing have its ChatGPT moment, which is to say, ChatGPT was the most the most quickly adopted consumer app in human history. And I remember that scary moment, and I quickly realized this was a Darwinian moment. It was an evolutionary moment, not that we're encountering a new life form, although that may come to pass, it may not. It's that in this game, which was already very competitive, I mean, who wouldn't want to write for a living? It's great fun. You get to meet interesting people and travel the world from the safety of your home office. It's going to be a Darwinian moment because I realized that a lot of the kind of very basic jobs of content are now commoditized. They're easy to do. You can do them in seconds. And that made me think, gosh, what on earth am I going to do? And obviously, professionals, we can write better than AI. But AI can give us the foundation, but it can't give us the ideas. I quickly realized that, we sell ideas now. We're in the business of coming up with creative solutions and ideas. It can't synthesize different topics to create something new. It can't create novelty. And so the reason I call this a Darwinian moment is there's going to be a lot of pain. There's going to be a lot of people who are not going to be working in this space for much longer. But the people that are working in this space that survive this, and let's hope it's all of us sitting here. Obviously, it's hard to know for sure, but I know you will, Dustin, for instance. I've worked with you now for a while, so that you're safe. It's but there are a lot of people will go, but the people that survive will go on to greatness. They will dominate the landscape, and they'll go. They'll become the Tyrannosaurus Rex of the content landscape, big, bold, beautiful, and probably a little bit savage. So it's exciting. It is an exciting time. It's a competitive time, and it's a scary time. So I'm excited about kind of combining the skills of the human brain and a human storyteller and a human confidant, as well as a consultant or that Alan Shoebridge Alan mentioned. We're confidants as well. We work with clients and we get their thoughts out of their heads. And AI can't do that. Often people think it can, but it can't. People don't know what they know sometimes, and having someone like me, a journalist, kind of coax it out of them gently in a safe space is a human task that I think will become very important in the future.
Yeah, and I think, like when I kind of reflect back on the last few years, I really feel like, content is becoming abundant in this age, but counsel is premium. Like that's what we can put our premium on. And even I think about in-house, so I work for, a large healthcare organization. We have a large in-house communication team. When I started my career, like there were individual people who were just all they did was copywriting. They were copywriter and editor, that's all they did. They didn't do client interactions, nothing. But actually, that type of role got phased out quite a while ago, even before AI. And I think that's probably true in a lot of big organizations where you used to have specialists, so all they did was basically content. And I think the evolution of our career has been a little bit of like, you're going to need to do content and you need to do a lot of counsel. You're going to need to do a lot of strategic advice. And I think to Jasper's point, like if all you want to do is just content, if you just want to sit in a room and create content and you don't want to do strategic counseling or kind of like planning, those roles are in jeopardy. But for everyone else, and I think that's the majority, for everyone else, you're kind of doing a little bit of everything. You've got content, you've got strategic management, client management, and really leaning into like figuring out a perspective on how AI can help you so you can focus more and more of your time on that sort of counsel piece. And I think my entire career, what I've heard from communicators, almost everyone, is we don't want to be seen as the people who just make things sound good and look pretty. We want to be valued for our strategic, contribution. So I think that's why I feel somewhat that today we have an opportunity to do that in a new way and kind of double down on that. So that's just my advice to all the communicators is like figure out that counsel piece you can do, that premium that we can really offer right now, and lean into that and figure out how I can help you do it.
I I mentioned during our prep call, but I'm quite bullish on the ways in which AI is going to impact comms. I think we're going to see a heyday over the next 5 years, where the value of having a savvy communication strategist at the wheel will reveal itself as being a critical piece of a business. A lot of the attention around AI right now gets eaten up by AI slop, right? And so we know that good writing and good thinking helps break through. And then there's also the AI piece of like, how can we leverage AI tools and build systems to help us do our best work and work smarter and unlock things that we couldn't do before, including how we measure and understand the work. But then there's also this piece around AI search. And this is the piece that I'm most excited about right now, because I think most companies haven't clued in yet to how profound of a shift this really is, where everyone who matters to your business is talking to AI now about you. And they're using AI to make decisions about you. So it's not just buyers, it is also top talent, it's job candidates, it's also investors, it's partners. Everyone who matters to your business is now learning about you, often through an AI mediated service. So we all have AI reputations, whether we're looking or not. Companies do, people do, spokespeople do, products do. And this is going to impact every corner of your business. It's going to impact your support team. It's going to impact your product marketing team, your product team, how you make decisions around what ends up on the roadmap. There's a new calculus for that also involves information that someone who's sitting on that AI search seat inside your company can pull for you. So I think that having a comm strategists who can oversee all of this and bring it back into the business as business intelligence, and then build strategies to shape the information environment that's feeding AI, that's going to become a really important role. And it's beyond anything that we've seen before. It's really a business intelligence role. And I think communications folks are really well positioned for it.
I'm going to put a link into the comments here because you just said that it's business intelligence. And last week's show, we actually discussed how speaking C-suite, what I call it, say whatever you want to, is now our core comms competency. We can't get away with saying we're brilliant writers, or we can write really fast, or any of those things that until 4 years ago really did elevate us. You could be a mediocre writer and that was okay. But now AI can be the mediocre writer. And so at the end of the day, I want to dial into, Lindsay, if we get all this stuff out there and everyone's finding it on search, but how I think a lot of communicators get stuck in the communication side, not in communicating to the business function. So can each of you please speak from your perspectives on the value of search, the value of being a counselor, and Jasper, the value of uncovering those most important stories and how to think about them from a business function. I'm going to go on mute because I'm also doing babysitting.
Jasper,
Oh, brilliant. Yeah. So the importance of uncovering stories. I've kind of lived through many trends in content actually now. I may not look it, but I'm getting old. And I guess the first of those was the move from print to digital. When we used something new called the internet, and then it was to SEO, or SEO, I called it, search engine homogenization, and now it's onwards to AI. And it is exciting and scary and unpredictable because the SEO has its own kind of dark magic which people claim to understand but didn't, because the algorithms changed in imperceptible ways and we were all rushing to keep up. And I remember working at a tabloid newspaper where suddenly Google and Facebook decided they didn't like us, and boom, our traffic disappeared overnight from millions of readers to no one, to hundreds of thousands, to be fair. It still wasn't that bad. And so, but the joy, the real opportunity here is to stand out from the crowd, which was always the job on the internet. The internet has always been a noisy space. Social media has always been a noisy space. you know, the newsstand where we used to buy magazines have always been noisy spaces. And the skill has been to shout as loudly as possible to be heard whilst maintaining brand credibility. Because there's every chance that if you scream your head off in a noisy space, you're going to look unhinged. And goodness knows I have looked unhinged in the public realm as a consequence. But the skill is you know, for a brand or a company or a advocacy group or whatever it is, the real opportunity here is to craft something so good that people can't ignore it, because you will be ignored. Mediocrity, as I often say, in the age of AI, mediocrity is endangered. Average is endangered. In fact, that's how I say it. Average is endangered. You know, we really need to be finding the best stories, the best headlines, the best messages, and they're going to need to stand out. And actually, that's kind of an exciting challenge. It's a scary challenge, but it's not wholly different from the past. It's just maybe given a little bit of a new bite by the sheer volume of content we're dealing with. And, you know, expanding the Darwinian metaphor, it's noisy at the moment. It might not stay as noisy. You know, will we have as many content producers in the future, or will the strongest survive and everyone else get sort of winnowed out? You know, they go the way of the dodo whilst we all become Homo sapiens. You know, so good they named us twice. That's the next evolution of Homo sapiens. And yes, I think the importance of just choosing the very best messages and shouting loudly in a crowded environment as a big opportunity for communicators, as well as a risk.
Yeah, I kind of feel like you're just never going to go wrong, at least right now, or in the immediate future of like trying to create good content, a baseline good content, not the slop, good content that helps solve problems. And I think, you know, both personally and professionally, I've had some experience with that. And, you know, even how search has changed so much. So, you know, you just do a Google search now, you're going to get the Gemini overview. It's going to tell you something, and you might not even click to anything else. And I was recently looking, I had some healthcare questions I asked, and I noticed that it said at the bottom, like, you may want to consult a doctor at, and Providence was one of the places. I was like, oh, that's great. So obviously, like, we're creating some content that's, you know, driving that search. That's nice. And then even I've had some experience on the personal side of, you know, a few years ago, I wrote an article about how long it takes to get comfortable in a new job. That was a LinkedIn article. And I thought, okay, it's great. And it had a really nice reception the first, you know, couple weeks I wrote the article, and then I forgot about it. And then about 2 years later, I started getting pings on the article all the time. And I'm like, what's going on? And this article was featured by Gemini as one of the key links about answering that question. So again, like, people have questions, and if you can have content that helps them solve problems, that's really going to get emphasized by AI right now. And I think that's a real opportunity. Now, again, it's hard to always know exactly how to tune your content to do that, but you can see the opportunities really out there. So good content that you put some effort into creating really can have a nice shelf life that, you know, was a little more difficult to do in the past. So there is opportunity there. And I just go to, again, good content that helps people answer questions and solve problems is always going to be a good baseline to start from.
Yeah, I'd add to that there's content strategy in the age of AI is fascinating, because AI is now representing you in answer boxes in rooms that you can't see, and you're crossing your fingers that it's doing a good job, right? So I think years ago, a lot of companies won, especially on the SEO front and the content front, by creating content around keywords and things that would drive a lot of traffic your way. And then the goal was to rank and then drive people to your site and then pull them into your ecosystem, nurture them through to a sale. And so whatever creative ways that you approach that, you know, there were all different ways, but that was the job at hand. There's a new layer here where you need to arm AI systems with the information they need to represent you to people so that they can actually represent you in a way that serves your interests. So what would your best salesperson say to these questions that a really savvy B2B buyer is asking when they're stress testing and it's the, you know, procurement team? What do they need to know? This information can't be hidden any longer behind, you know, sales teams and sales decks, and you can't rely on bringing people through to talk to your sales team for that. You need to arm AI with the information it needs. So it's a whole layer of strategic choices around what to sort of feed out into the you know, the internet, and what sort of information needs to exist where, and then being able to measure and understand whether it's doing the job that you need it to do. So beyond just fighting AI slop with creativity, there's a whole strategic layer here for content that requires you to really understand the people that you need to move more than ever, right? You need to understand your buyer and all the different buyers in your committee and all the different stages and questions of a buyer journey, because they're now able to ask AI instead of, coming through your door and talking to your sales team.
And I want to jump in real quick and break my normal 2-second silence rule, because Trevor Chapman just asked a question. He said, if editors are spending time trying to determine whether something is human before they even evaluate the idea, have some of us create a bigger problem because their reporters and editors are getting, bad pitches from AI slop? How do thoughtful communicators take the time to create custom pitches break through when inboxes are increasingly filled with automated crap? And that's a direct quote. And I'm going to go back to what you said, Lindsay, about strategic content, because every single piece of content has to be strategic. And that doesn't mean MBA word salads that say a lot but actually say nothing. When we pitch, we have a really firm, it's 8 words, 60 characters in the subject line. And that subject line summarizes the first paragraph of the pitch. That pitch summarizes, let's say, an 800-word op-ed or an event or whatever. And that rest of that pitch summarizes everything. And so when we do our pitches, it is the first sentence gets out who we're pitching, their title, and why they matter. Because journalists don't have time to waste. And so I think every single piece of content, whether it's a blog post, social media, the pitch itself must be strategic. And again, it doesn't have to be an MBA word salad strategic, but you have to be thinking about the end user. Because at the end of the day, and people in PR hate to hear this, we're all in sales. Whether we're trying to sell for bigger budget, sell for a client, sell for getting that reporter to cover what we want. So we always have to be thinking about the business impact for a journalist who's overloaded, at risk of their job going away, and who has to make their editor happy and make the audience happy so they still have a job next week. So that's my answer to Trevor. I would like to hear anyone else's contribution to that.
I actually, I think that standing out, I'd say, is the most important thing. It's actually very interesting to think about the mechanics of standing out. So it's well known in the media that a headline with a typo will get more engagement than a headline without a typo.
True.
So I've done some, or I've advised some people on pitching in my time. And there's little tricks you can do. They're called pattern interrupts. So if you're dealing with a writer, another writer, you're pitching a writer, you sort of want to shock them out of their complacency when they're in a crowded inbox. If you just a little shock, and that can be an unexpected word, it can be a word that repeats itself. For instance, for one client, I suggested they use the phrase "the humanized non-human future of work," which is a very ugly phrase. I would never ever use that in public. It did the job. The client wanted to be in the FT and management today, very hard targets. I gave it to the outreach team and they got it. With that line, you said you can't write that. It's like that's exactly what you're going to have to write. You're going to have to think outside the box here, and that was a pattern interrupt. So those sort of skills of grabbing attention, which, by the way, tabloid journalists are extremely good at. You don't need to put words in huge capitals to do that, or that might help. I think that's kind of what one of the great skills of the moment is this ability to grab attention, which is a risky endeavor because you can easily take it too far. And I would never ever in a million years, Dustin, in my copy write the humanized non-human future of work. It's one of the ugliest phrases I've ever seen in my life. But if you're pitching writers, it makes them feel unsettled. And you get a click as a result. So understanding the psychology of what makes people click on something and how to trigger that psychology is a kind of exciting thing to think about, I think.
And I know everyone's in a little bit different space, but I do think that, relationships still matter. So when you have established relationships with trade publications, others, reporters who trust you, like keep that relationship strong, keep that trust going. And, it wouldn't take more than, a couple of bad pitches to really break that. So I do think like valuing those relationships, it's hard when you're starting from scratch, but sometimes I think people can forget about the fact that those relationships do matter. So continue to cultivate that. It's still really important. I think it's still very important.
And I agree that pattern interruption is a great skill for PR people to think about more. I think a lot of us do that intuitively. Good PR people do that intuitively, but naming it and really breaking down the formula behind it so that you can be more conscious of it is a good thing to do. I think also a simple gesture for showing respect for journalists right now is just really clear subject line. Like not
Mhm.
playing games, not trying to trick anyone, putting the hook and the information and the story and the news and the data right up front. Dustin, you mentioned 60 characters or less, right? Most journalists are reading from their phones. I saw some in a post from Chris Stokel Walker, who's a tech journalist, I think Fast Company.
British. And
Yeah, yeah. And he did a deep dive into his inbox and he saw that he receives over 5,000 pitches per month, which is, I think when I did the math, it was like every 2 minutes of every business day, that poor man is getting a pitch.
22 business days. So he's getting 225 pitches per business day.
Yeah, it's like two every minute. Or one, sorry,
Yep.
one every 2 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
So
right. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Lindsay. Yeah.
yeah, so I think just showing respect by putting the information forward. So when they're scanning, you immediately register as straightforward, here to help, not playing games, not hiding
Right.
information. This isn't clickbait. Let's put the information right
Right.
where you can see it. Small gesture, but I think it makes a world of difference for showing respect for journalists.
Now, let's just dive into the what you do, Lindsay, because when we talked in the prep call, you said you were bullish, and you said, "I hope you don't mind." And I said, "No problem." Well, I can push back a little bit. And one of the stats that's been going around from Muckrag, there's two stats that I've seen cited, and I'm not the AI search expert, but there's two concerns I have. I get three with some of the people who are most bullish. One is I've seen the Muckrag stat of 95% of I think it's LLM search is coming from earned media sources. And I think 84% was the more recent number. But the other studies that I've seen referenced from Sarah Evans and others who know this much better than I do is that it's much more in the minority. So are we as PR professionals at risk of overstating the percentages if people are seeing other studies and seeing other results, maybe in their own customized universe? So one, are we at risk of overstating? And then two, are we at risk of doing what SEO people did or marketing people did a decade ago, where they made everything so focused on SEO that user experience went out the window? One person I respect posted about boring PR is what's going to get it picked up in the LLMs. But if it's boring, then the user isn't going to actually use it. So those would be my two major concerns, tying back the idea of speaking to the business of communications and communicating to the business.
It's a really good question. I get asked about the Muckrack data quite a bit, and I have a lot of respect for the Muckrack team. I love seeing them forging ahead, trying to solve this challenge for PR folks. The lists that you see, though, sometimes that are the top 10 lists, these are the most cited publications. Those are a bit tricky because you need to understand which prompts were used to produce those lists. A lot of informational prompts, like what is a CRM, right? Those types of things are maybe being referenced by certain types of publications or Wikipedia or whatnot. But the kind of list you'll get from informational queries is very different from the list that you'll get when you're, looking at B2B software, for example, right? You're people who are asking questions like, is this software the right fit for my business? I have a company that has 50 people. This is the type of compliance we need. We're operating in this space. I need this specific reporting feature for my CFO. So those are the kinds of questions that real people ask when they're vetting software or making buying decisions. They're not walking into an LLM and saying, what is a CRM or what's the best CRM and then bouncing, right? They are using a tool to stress test and find fit. So late stage sort of buying questions, high intent buying questions produce very different lists. And depending on which industry you're operating in, right? You will see patterns of which publications are most cited and seem to be trusted. highly credible sources that, come up again and again. So it's very important to see those lists and take them as an input, but also be able to do the digging work. This is where partnering with a good SEO is really powerful, is do the digging work to really understand what your list needs to look like. And there's different tools you can use for that. But you can also use LLMs and do some auditing work yourself. It's a starting point. It's not a perfect solution, but there are lots of ways to sort of find out what your top 30 are and really know to lean into those. But those generalized lists can be a little bit tricky for that reason.
That is the best answer I've heard. Thank you, Lindsay. You just taught me like 3 things. So thank you.
You're welcome.
And folks who are watching, please ask questions. We want to answer any concerns you have, because again, we want to speak to what's really happening in your world. Which, speaking of, Alan, you're in a highly regulated space. When it comes to using AI, I did a couple episodes of the show a few months back on AI can't just be bolted onto a comp strategy. It has to be integrated across the team, across different departments. How do you find yourself really being able to prove the consultant side? Because we can all talk, I think half the problem with PR not being as respected as we all think it should be, and comms in general, is half of it is on us because we're not necessarily good at the business side.
Yeah.
But some of it is also the C-suite not getting it. And so how have you shifted how you present yourself and your function within Providence?
Well, I've just always been a really big believer that if people don't know what you do, they're going to kind of assume the worst, right? If you all remember, it's an old movie, but that movie Office Space, where the 2 consultants are looking, they say, what exactly do you say you do here? And I would say if someone's asking you that question, you're in trouble. Like, you should not be getting asked that question. You should be proactive. So I've really believed that you need to have an internal stakeholder management plan. You need to look at the partners you work with and say, these people don't understand enough what we do. Like, we need to educate them. These people we have a good relationship with. Let's just continue to do that. And then maybe there's some people that are detractors. Like, they honestly don't think we do a good job. So how do you manage those internal stakeholders to get to those people and actually fix or build those relationships? It's really fundamental. And I mean, we should have been doing that long before this era, but I think even now it's even more important, because you will have people that go, why do we even need that function? Can't AI just do it? So that key foundational thing of a stakeholder management plan for your partners internally is really important. I do think in terms of answering the question too, educating the communications team about how to use AI has been really important. So we've actually pulled together an AI work group. We have a very large communication team, so over 100 people. But we pulled together a work group of 20 or so that are really interested and enthused, and getting them to figure out how we can spread best practices, get people to be comfortable. And there still are a lot of people who are, they're embracing it, but there's still people who are skeptical or have concerns or have issues about ethics or environmental impact and all that. And so we are trying to, again, just trying to figure out how to get our team educated, get them engaged a little bit, because I think even if you decide that for most of your work, you don't need to use AI, that's okay if you've gotten to the place where you've made a decision about it and you've actually evaluated the tools and figured out your work process. I just think the worst position to be in is just not even know, oh, I haven't even opened the tools or I don't use them. I mean, at Providence, we have Copilot in all of our applications. Now, again, Copilot's not the most robust product, but it's pretty good. And it works really well for things like editing and drafts and all that. So I use it every day just in applications like that. So again, I just want everyone on our team to have tried the tools, to put some thought into it, figure out where it does and does not fit in your workflow. And that's the best position. But going back to your first question, how we started off, I think it's really fundamental. I think it's building relationships and making sure that no one's ever coming to you and going, what do you do? I don't understand what you do. Get in front of that, have conversations so they don't ask you those questions, and then share what you're doing, what's having success. It's fundamental, but I think a lot of PR and comms people internally, they don't do that. They're not thinking about how to continually just educate people on what they do. That slips out of their mind, and then they get in a position where people might not understand the value we really bring.
And Jasper, I want to pivot to you, because one of the things we talked about last week on the show was, I dated somebody 14 years ago who said she didn't think she was very smart. I happen to disagree with that, but I said to her, well, even if you aren't intelligent, which you are, I said, you're pretty quiet. No one, better to be you if you're not smart than be me. And if you, as my father used to tell me when I was a child, better to be thought of as a fool than to open your mouth and remove all possible doubt. I said, if you're a fool and you're quiet, no one's going to know anyway. So Jasper, a lot of communications people are like, oh, I don't do math very well, or I don't understand business function. But one of the things that become a big believer in the last 5 years, ever since I read Chris Voss's book about negotiation, is the value of asking questions. Not because you necessarily have the answer, but by being able to say, you ask that question, this is the next logical conclusion. I don't know the answer to that. Let me ask it. I find there's a lot of credibility built by asking questions and then summarizing the answers that you're given in your own words. So I'd like you to speak to that a little bit when it comes to how you, as a communicator, interview subjects. We rely on you a lot for interviewing our authors. Many of them have never done PR before, or interviewing the executives that we're working with to make sure that we get a good transcript, make sure we get into their heads to uncover the real story. So if you can speak to the importance of asking questions to build trust, that'd be very helpful.
Yeah, I've asked a lot of questions to a lot of different people in my time. And I think it remains a very important human skill. When you are interviewing a client, it's slightly different to interviewing them as a journalist, because when you're a journalist, you're not necessarily a trusted ally. You are a portal to publicity and an enabler of the spreading of their message, but you're not really guaranteed to be their friend. But in communications, we are our client's friend, which is actually a lovely space to be in. So half of asking questions is to make them feel comfortable, to make them feel free just to talk. Because I find often one of the greatest mistakes I've seen over the years is a client saying, for instance, I've spent the morning talking to Claude, and here's what I've produced, and what they've done is no good. Whereas if they talk to me or a professional interviewer, we would have coaxed something out of them. And so, you start by just being quite general. You kind of get a sense of what it is that makes this important to them, what they know, what they don't know. And then you gradually zero in. I'm often telling people to ask concrete questions. Don't ask, what was it like what was it like when AI started to make you worry for your job? Say, can you describe an exact moment when you realize, gosh, my job is under pressure here? And those exact questions, and those are the stories you'll get. So I've always asked a lot of questions. Obviously, that's another thing that comes with a risk, because it can be a bit annoying. You've got to know when to shut up as well as to proceed, I guess, is quite important. But and I think that will remain important. Experts don't always know what they know. I've seen this over and over and over again. They tell you something that they assume every fool in the world understands, because they've been embedded in their discipline for decades, and they're the top of their game. And they say, everyone knows that. Are you stupid? And well, no, not everybody knows that. And it's finding those little nuggets and letting people trust you, and bring them out of them, and encouraging them not to speak to Claude, but to speak to another human being, especially a human being that knows what is and isn't a story, which is also unusual, because what is a story? It's something that will grab people's attention. It's actually simple. A story is, if I can explain it to you here and you'll go, oh gosh, that's interesting, then that's a story. If you can tell it to someone in the pub,
It's
as well as British reference
That's
there,
right.
at the bar, then it's a story. If you can't, it isn't.
I think you're exactly right. When I interview people, and something I always ask them is, what are three things what is something that you've always wanted to say but never had the opportunity, the courage, or some other reason to not say it? What is something that the industry needs to know? What is something your customers need to know? Those three questions usually get to something that's really deep about them. And then I tell them, talk for the next 3 minutes. I'm going to interrupt you when you hit upon the thing. And Jasper, to your point, I'm not an expert in a lot of the industries for our clients, but if they say something that strikes me as that's really fascinating, that's probably the nugget that we're going to dial into.
Hmm. Another good question is asking them, what keeps your customers up at night? What is their biggest worry? And this is a bit of an interrupt between journalists slash PRs and marketing. Marketing is very positive. But
Oh,
nobody clicks on happy stories. You don't get the front page. Good news, everyone. Hold the front page.
sure.
Unless it really is good news. The world's not going to end after all. Happy days. it's that that positive, so that sort of interrupt between marketing and PR is a kind of a consistent obstacle, between positive and between story that's highlighting a challenge, which is where the spaces we live in. So that's a good question. What keeps your customers up at night? What are they worried about?
And then Lindsay, speaking of questions, with what you do, speaking of questions, one of the things that again I'm very fairly ignorant, I would say, on the scale of things on LLMs. And so I've noticed that with the team that we have on the back end is putting our blog posts together and other things on our website, the tags have changed, right? Because people are searching differently. And I know this with myself, right? I search something. I no longer search for a thing. I search for a very complex question, knowing that the Google summary is going to come up in a way. And 2 years ago, I was really resistant. Oh, I'm going to click to that original source. Now I skim it like everyone else. So how can PR people make sure that we are having the right keyword content, if that's even the right word anymore, but keyword content that also has the user experience? I know I asked the question a little bit differently earlier, but I want to dial into making sure that we are thinking about the most important questions as we're putting content together for searchability.
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the frameworks that we use at Notebook Agency is, we call it Truth Alignment Framework. And I mentioned this a bit earlier, which is, AI search requires that communication strategy layer where you are intentionally shaping the information environment so that AI can represent you. It can recommend you. It can describe you accurately, and it can recommend you to the right people at the right time. So the task is really to understand your buyer and what they need to know about you to make
What are you
their.
doing?
And so
Yes.
a certain level of creativity required in answering those
That's an
questions
option.
in a way that LLMs, optimized for LLMs, and following some of the current best practices, which I'm sure will continue to change. But there is a first principles element to this, which is clear communication that helps a buyer make a decision and understand the context in which they're making that decision. I was heavily influenced by a book by April Dunford. Oh, shoot, I'm forgetting the name right now.
I'll Google it.
Okay, great. It's her positioning book. She also has a wonderful sales book. But your job is
Introduction to positioning,
obviously awesome.
product positioning exercise.
There's obviously awesome, and then there's another one that's her sales book. But they're fantastic books, and I think every PR person should read them too, because they really do equip you for the moment. So I think there's asking the right questions that really represent what your buyer is asking. So I think as a comms person right now, you need to be sitting down with your sales team if you weren't already. You need to be going through every possible source that you can to hear your customer's voice, your gong transcripts. Yes, that's her book. Yeah.
Obviously, also how to nail product positioning so customers get it, buy it, love it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's a really good read right now to understand what your content as a collective really needs to accomplish out in the world. And I think comms people should be, bumping into SEO people. They should be bumping into content people, product marketing people. If your team is not sort of bumping into one another now, looking for where the new swim lanes are, that's a sign maybe that you haven't leaned in enough into this space.
Yeah, and I just also just lean into that idea of, again, people are out there looking to solve problems. So like if we can build our content around solving problems and answering questions that are common, I think that's a really good, smart kind of starting point, and just making sure like if I'm writing this article, I just think a lot differently, I think right now, about like how I'm writing my headlines, how I'm putting content in there, that if someone is searching, they're trying to solve a problem, and do I have that sort of explicitly stated somewhere in the article, like either in the headline or the copy, like this is going to answer your question, and if you click on it or it gets featured in AI search, like it's going to be more likely to be featured in AI search because we're answering a common question very specifically, doing it well, and just spelling it out. That's what we're doing.
Can I
Yeah.
ask, Can I ask a question of you, Lindsay? Actually, something I'm interested in, as I've always bemoaned SEO and search engine homogenization because it's led to the same kind of headlines. And how many articles you've read on the papers? What is AI? Everything you need to know about the new technology reshaping the world. Will formulas and formulae, sorry, the plural of formula, be less important in the AI age because they have a deeper understanding? Google's algorithms were very mechanical. They've seemed steam powered by comparison. So you literally would type in what is. They've got better, obviously, more natural language. We say that we will have to like signal question, include questions and signal intent and all the rest of it. But will we actually need to follow formula in the new era? Because the understanding of the AI models is that much greater that it will just kind of get what we're talking about anyway a bit better. And so we won't need to be so paint by numbers.
It's a good question. I don't know if anyone knows. I think the word from Google is that semantic AI, right? The ability to understand what the intent is getting better by the minute. So maybe that's where we'll end up, where creative writing will make it'll circle back and you can be as inventive as you'd like. I think we're living in a time period now where you really do need to pay attention to some of the best practices around optimizing good content. It doesn't mean making it a terrible experience for people. And often when, content people start looking at certain jargon and phrases that SEOs use, like EEAT, like it really just gets back to good communication, being very clear, and being clear doesn't mean you can't be compelling. So I think we are still in the stage where we do need to optimize and understand how different models, what the preferences seem to be for what is being cited, or what content where we can see there's indicators of influence on AI models. We still need to be optimizing. But maybe we will move to that world. I mean, that might be where we're headed, where semantic search is so good that the AI will understand and interpret in ways that will make our lives even easier.
It's kind of interesting to see where like the AI search is prioritizing content too and being found. Obviously like there's things like Reddit that comes up a lot, but LinkedIn, like, and we're talking on LinkedIn now, but like I mentioned the article that I wrote, well, it was on LinkedIn, and I know that AI search values like those kind of career advice articles coming from LinkedIn a lot more than it would be coming from my personal website, right? So I think when you like think about where's this going to be, or where should we like start, or where can we land this? And then I know we talked about it earlier, but with the whole PR aspect, we know that getting pitching and landing in certain publications, certain online outlets, it's going to have a lot more value than again like our owned media properties. So thinking that part of your strategy too, of like what trusted sources are really best, and can we either control it ourselves, or do we have to bring in some partnerships? But that piece is really interesting to me. And obviously it's going to shift over time. But again, since we're on LinkedIn, I just encourage anyone, like if you've got content you want to experiment, like writing a LinkedIn article could be something that works really well because it's a trusted source right now.
Yes. Yeah. And you sometimes see it pop up within hours of it being posted. And I think it has to do with the signals that are there for the LLMs around your expertise and credibility, right? It's associated with your profile, your professional profile. So it's actually a treasure trove for LLMs of expertise and opinions and content that is verifiable.
So we got about 10 minutes left, and Trevor asked a question I want to get to, but I want to dial on something, Alan, that you I think you flirted with it, maybe by accident, and then you retreated from it. But you said trusted outlets, but there's also accessible outlets, right? Alan, you're in an industry that is B2B, but also B2C, right? And not just in the macro sense, but each individual community, what you said, 51 hospitals? That's 51 communities plus micro communities for each individual, secondary offices and everything else. Most local media outlets have paywalls, or many of them do. You have a lot, the Wall Street Journal is great for readers, but not so great because it's this paywall. And so I'd be very interested in, Lindsay, you helping us understand LLM value for paywall secure, whether they have 0 or 5 or none. And Alan, your position as the consultant, as the counselor. And then Jasper, your perspective, because mine is that we need to be aware of both, I guess, 3 aspects. How quick can we land it there in the first place? We call it gettability, to the word we made up. So gettability. Then there's reachability to the audience themselves. And then there's a third part in the last 2, 3 years, which is the LLM reach. And I'm usually less concerned about that because you can use marketing and other tools to spread the wealth and spread the reach. But Lindsay and then Alan and then Jasper, I'd be very interested in your perspectives on how seriously paywalls should be considered by the PR professional when hitting outlets.
I think it should be considered. I don't think it's the whole story. I would never advise someone to run away from pursuing top tier coverage if they think that it is possible for the brand and it's in the best interest of their brand. You know, the Wall Street Journal may be paywalled, but you still have a very important, sophisticated business audience that relies on it every day. And being present in that publication is a marker of credibility. Yes, there's a paywall, but there's a long way to go here with how AI companies are going to engage with media outlets, and that's not really a problem that's been solved yet. There's some really interesting companies that are coming into the space to try to solve for licensing, allowing AI companies to create agreements to pay for content. There's one called Factiva. There's a few other ones. They're quite interesting. So watching what's happening on the technology side to solve for that challenge, that dispute between media companies and AI models. And because there could be something that appears tomorrow that allows all of that top tier coverage all of a sudden to be front and center in LLMs. There's also a study that was done out of McGill University here in Canada that looked at, they ran a test to see if LLMs showed that they had consumed Canadian news. And they looked at whether the LLMs could repeat details from that news that would only have been accessible behind paywalled media sites. And they were able to demonstrate their understanding of that news. So why or how, I can't explain that, but there is a layer here of what LLMs can consume and piece together and what influences them that you may not see coming back when you're looking at what gets cited or what gets sort of pulled verbatim into AI answers. So I think it will all kind of work itself out as we solve for some of these sort of hiccups along the way. So I would never advise someone to run away from top tier coverage, or I think it's still super valuable. I think you can also take coverage that you earn that maybe isn't as visible in AI models and give it more legs. You can take a version of it and talk about, you could jump on a YouTube video with your executive and talk about this new piece of coverage that you were featured in the Wall Street Journal, where you're stating what you said in the article again and talking about being included in the piece. There's also a respectful way to write about this content on your site and include a canonical link back to the original piece as well. So there's all sorts of ways that you can surface this information in a way that serves your business and gives it legs. So that's sort of how I think about it. But I do think there's value in PR teams looking at their media lists and ensuring that they have the right mix, because you do need to be visible and you do want to be included and written about and talked about in places that are accessible and often cited by LLMs. So it's a balance.
Yeah, you made so many great points. You kept making every point I was going to make and more. It's really good because I think you're right. I mean, I don't think you want to limit yourself. I think there is so much other beyond just the AI search stuff. There's so much you can do if you get that top tier coverage, even if it's behind a paywall. And I even think it's funny how often sometimes people forget that like you can use GIF links, like if you're using a lot of times you can get the coverage and you can share it out to an audience. Again, it's not going to do the same thing as the AI search, but on your social or internally or whatever, like there's ways to get the content out. And I think there's a good balance. And the only thing I would add, and I kind of said it before, is like, if you are active too, or you're executive, like if you're working with an executive, you may want to consider doing some things like LinkedIn articles or whatever. Like you can control that property. Don't have to worry about pitching or anything. But if you want him to show up or him or her to show up, visibility wise, you might think of those things that you could control too that might help balance out if you're not getting the media coverage you want. Like, can you take control of it in a way that will leverage traditional social, but also maybe have some influence on AI search, and think about that as part of your strategy?
I've had a long-standing animus towards paywalls, to be honest. I've worked behind paywalls, which is a completely different model from writing for the open internet, and I've also worked obviously on the open internet. Writing for subscribers with subscribers in mind is pretty stressful, to be honest, as opposed to shouting as loud as possible and hoping a load of randoms kind of click on your content. Um, I expect what we'll see the rise of is more and more publications just simply, doing the equivalent of a no spiders SEO move, which means that you're not getting indexed by Google. No robots, sorry. You set your no robots on your website, and Google spiders can't look at you. And I imagine to protect the kind of integrity of the paywall, we'll see more publications hide behind their paywall and take that option, which I think is probably pretty negative, obviously, in a PR context, but it's pretty negative for the spread of information. One of the great concerns of mine was the kind of two-tier information ecosystem where you have people with wealth having the very, very good information from The Economist or the Financial Times or the New York Times or the London Times, the Times, and all the rest of it reading the places that I used to write for, the tabloids, which were obviously excellent, don't get me wrong. And you were probably the best communicators in the game are tabloid journalists, almost certainly the best communicators in the game. But do they provide the same kind of business specific or useful information that you'd get in The Economist? No, absolutely not. And so that's kind of a wider societal concern. But for PRs, I think there's clearly a value of getting behind those paywalls, whether they're indexed by LLMs or not. Just having the Wall Street Journal icon on your website is a job well done. It doesn't really matter what they've said about you, just having that on there is fantastic. So I think paywalled top tier targets will remain important, even though I loathe paywalls and wish they would all come down.
Even just getting the headline and a 2 sentence summary might be a huge victory if people are out there seeing the news.
Absolutely.
So we're going to end. By the way, Angela Griffo asked a question: what are the best tools to measure how a company is showing up in AI searches? We don't have time to get into that, but anyone who's watching wants to get that answer. I tagged Lindsay, Sarah Evans, and Sam Mickelson to jump in there and provide some answers. What I do want to close, and we're double dipping on Trevor's questions here, but I think he asked a really good one that dives back to the sub thread here, which is, yes, the era of AI slop, which puts our jobs at risk as communicators, but also how to be relevant to the business function. And what he asked was, how are you balancing executive and client expectations around timelines? What PR success looks like today? They are more impatient because they have AI at their fingertips. And so I'd like to do a quick round robin here to close out. And my view is there's two things. One, set expectations from the very beginning before you even sign the contract, because you want to have people walking in knowing what's going to happen. Like we always describe it, we're a headache for the first 4 weeks, so we're not a headache for the following 5 months. We want to let everyone know that those first few weeks we are gathering information, we're learning about them, they're learning about us. There's a lot going on there. And then second, and I've seen people in PR criticize this, that it's not necessary, but I think calendars are super important. Understanding what a client or an organization, if you're in-house, wants to hit for a goal at a certain time, and then have it walking back from that goal. Put first things first, as Stephen Covey said, and walk back to today allows you to set a calendar. Yes, you have to be flexible. You can't be rigid anymore. You have to be flexible whether it's a crisis or an opportunity. But I think setting expectations and then understanding the goals so you can walk back to today is really, really important. So when you say, let's slow down, they understand why, and you understand how to present it from a business function standpoint.
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, I don't I haven't found internally that people are any more or less patient than they've ever been. People have always wanted stuff immediately, and you have to manage those expectations. And I think gets back to sort of like client management 101, like defining what do you need? Where do you really need it? Is this a true emergency? If not, let's negotiate. And I think that kind of conversation is as relevant today as it's ever been. And I think I would just encourage people to like be very transparent about what you can do, how you can do it, and set expectations with your clients before it gets out of hand. I think that's the best way to go.
Lindsay, Jasper?
It's a good question, and I agree with you, Alan. I don't know if I see people being more impatient than ever. I think it's sort of always been that way. I think, you know, I think it's also how you set up the measurement. No one would expect a salesperson coming in to close an enterprise
Whoa.
like in 4 weeks, right? So if you
Yep.
are to map out, you build your strategy, you say, here's what we want these folks to know about us. Here are the people that can help us reach those folks. These are the top journalists that matter, that have an outsized influence in our space. These are the publications that we want to be in. We've thought long and hard about the mix, AI readable, top tier, what our customers are reading. And we've put these lists together to say, these lists matter. And you are starting from, like when you go into the mall and you see where you are on the map and where you're trying to get to, it's like you are here, right? We're trying to get here. So mapping out for them that this is a journey and the work required to move a journalist from, I have no idea who you are or why I would open this email or trust you or talk to you or have your executive weigh in as opposed to this other person. That's a journey. So, I've always been, I've always liked creating my own measurement systems, including showing touch points. Here's how many emails it's taking to move this person. We've moved this percentage of these folks from I've never heard of you to opening emails, responding, interviewing an executive, writing about you in multiple ways, inbound requests for your expertise. I think mapping it out as a pipeline like you would a sales journey is a way of sometimes breaking through that does appeal to executives because they understand that journey. So that's one thing that I've done in the past.
And notice everybody, she talked about sales first. She talked about a business function in order to make the analogy to PR. That was really good. And Alan didn't get scared of Lindsay's analogy. He just had to jump to his next meeting. Jasper, you're gonna wrap us up here, so you better say something smart.
Yeah, I can see that clients, and people are impatient. I guess a bit of a knowledge of the media ecosystem or communicating with a knowledge of the media ecosystem goes a long way. When you're an innovator with a great idea, it can often feel, why am I not on the front page of the New York Times? But you need to tell clients the only way you're going to get on the front page of the New York Times is if you murder your colleagues. Realistically. Um, we're probably in more tactful sense.
Well, you got my attention, Jasper.
Ties the tabloid tricks. And you have to communicate the benefit of trade titles because a trade title behaves quite differently. Yes, it may be wonderful to get a mention on page 46 of the New York Times. It feels great. But really, what we understand about those websites is they follow the Pareto principle, which is that about 10% of the articles do about 90% of the traffic. And so actually you may get this article in the New York Times, whatever. It might not be clicked by that many people. It feels good, it looks good. It might not actually be that good. Whereas if you get on a trade title that's read with a bit more attention, trade titles tend to be read by fewer people, but those people tend to be decision makers. They're very much immersed in their craft, their game, their industry, and they read to the bottom. A typical kind of reader of the open internet. You get like a microsecond judgment of reading the headline, then they read for a few seconds and then they click off. And it's your job you're in a constant battle to kind of keep them and keep their attention, which is kind of an exciting game that I always enjoyed playing. So just communicating these realities, I think, and also what makes a story. This is a very difficult thing to communicate. Where you've done something really wonderful. You've rebranded your website. Yes, it's a lovely rebrand. It looks smashing, but that's not a story. The Economist is not going to be interested in that you've just hired a new head of HR with the best of intentions. So communicating the realities of the media ecosystem and starting small, getting those trade publications, getting those newsletters now, getting those blogs, getting those podcasts, getting these,
Yeah.
yes, it's not the Guardian, yes, it's not the New York Times, yes, it's not the Wall Street Journal, but it's the building blocks to get you there, and your every press placement is a step up the ladder towards where you want to go. And actually, those trade pubs can be just as valuable, if not more so, than the more transient major tier one publications.
As much as I shouldn't say it on my own show, the murder analogy was quite good. So we'll end with murder on this show, I guess. And no, Lindsay, this was great. You're actually the reason we had this conversation in the first place. So I'm glad we were able to make this work.
Thanks for having me.
Jasper, as always, I appreciate the Darwinian analogies and others that you made. And we'll do this again in a few months, folks. But again, if you have any questions, please make sure you tag any of the panelists in the comments. We'll try to get back to you today or tomorrow. And folks, hope you have a good rest of the day.